and welcome to YeurDreamin. I'm very excited to be a part of this virtual conference, and I would love to start off by just taking a moment to thank our sponsors. Amazing Dreamin events like this are not easy to put on, and we could not do it without the support of sponsors and just the general amazing Trailblazer community. So thank you to everyone who put in effort and made this possible. My name is Skye Tyler. I'm a Salesforce solution architect, Salesforce MVP, and an artist whenever I'm not Salesforcing. And I'll be talking to you today about elevating your flows with Data Fetcher. I'm currently a Salesforce consultant at Beyond the Horizon, where we focus on implementing Salesforce for nonprofit organizations. I am passionate about the role that nonprofits play in our communities, and I believe that they deserve access to world-class technology to better meet their mission. So a little bit about me there, just to do a quick intro. Let's go ahead and jump into what you're here for today, our agenda. First, we're going to start off with a brief introduction about reactive components, just in case you're not already familiar with what those are. And then we're going to talk about the Data Fetcher app that I'll be demoing today, give a summary and some information about that. But the bulk of today's session is going to be walking through a real-world use case of some of the ways that you can use Data Fetcher to elevate your flows. The examples we're going to give is using it to get email templates for sending the appropriate communication. I'm going to show how you can use it to create a dynamic filter on a single object, and then also a dynamic filter across multiple objects. And at the end of the presentation will be some resources to be able to help you expand your learning, try out what you've seen here today, and also just further connect in the community. So, brief introduction to reactive components. Before reactive components, we had to rely on the next button. So if you were thinking about how do you get information from your user and then return certain dependent results based on the information that you received, what you used to have to do is have one screen where they'd submit the data, you click next, that clicking next sends an action to the server that then retrieves data, and you present that back to the user in a subsequent screen. This could be time consuming, sometimes frustrating for the users, and it's also just inefficient. Creates some technical debt where you're having to maintain and update multiple screens and then multiple actions in between the screens. Well, as of the Winter 24 release, with the reactive components being available in Flow, now you're able to do that same kind of transactional interaction on a single screen. So you can have various components that are aware of what's happening with each other on that screen without having to rely on transactions to the server. So what a user inputs or updates on one part of a screen can then depend on what shows further down the screen or elsewhere on the screen. It doesn't have to be linear. But this has just been a game changer. And it's also a great experience for the users to be able just interacting on a single screen. And there's lots of ways that we can use this. So I'm going to go over a couple of examples, but I would love in the Trailblazer community and other conversations to hear about ways that you think that you could use this kind of reactive functionality. And so on to a quick overview of Data Fetcher. Data Fetcher is a Salesforce Labs app that's available on the App Exchange. If you are not already familiar with Salesforce Labs, you are missing out. Salesforce Labs is a program whereby Salesforce employees solve tricky or sticky situations with packaged apps that are available on the App Exchange. And one of the best parts is the apps are free. So if you haven't looked already, I encourage you to go to the Salesforce App Exchange, look for the Salesforce Labs provider, and see some of the amazing tools that they have available for you. Data Fetcher is one of those amazing tools that was built by my good friend Josh Damon. And one of the really powerful things about it is that it allows you to use SOQL queries to return records into a collection variable. Now, even if that's all that it did, it's still pretty fantastic. I don't know about you, but more than once I've tried to use the get element to return a record or sets of records, and I can't navigate relationships the way that I need to get that information that I'm trying to get. And SOQL just gives you a lot more flexibility and strength for querying records. But then you combine that with the reactive data table. And this is just the Salesforce standard data table in the flow screen component. And you're able to return visibly to the users the results from that SOQL query. And if you want to get super fancy, you use formulas to write out your SOQL query. And you can even add on some really amazing tools from Unofficial Salesforce's flow actions like Quick Choice or their slider component to make your solution even more dynamic. So I've thrown two really great resources at you within the first 5 minutes of this presentation. Salesforce Labs has some excellent resources available to help you build out your skills and tools, and also the Unofficial Salesforce actions. They have a ton of resources there that are also free and available. All right, so how can this help you? We're going to set the stage. The example, the story that we'll be telling today is about a dog rescue and adoption program called Let's Go Home. And full disclosure, the names here have been changed to protect the innocent. There's not an actual organization called Let's Go Home, but this is the illustrative purpose, and the ways that these are being used are actual real world ways that I have used Data Fetcher for my flows. So Let's Go Home, it's a dog rescue program, as I said. They use Salesforce records to keep track of the dogs that have been rescued and their availability for adoption. And they also use it to track the candidates of people who are interested in applying for and adopting those dogs. A couple of their business needs is they need to be able to send the right emails to the right people at the right time. They also want to make sure that people are able to search for available dogs before they start the application process. And then when a dog comes in, they want to make sure that they can match it with the best possible fit so they have the greatest likelihood of staying adopted into that home. So matching the dogs to the different applications from candidates. The first example we're going to go through is the email templates example. Now, in this use case, the placement team is responsible for matching the people who have applied to adopt a dog to dogs that are available to be adopted. And once a match has been made and adoption's been approved, they need to be able to send the proper email template, and they want to do it directly from the application record. And so we're going to show how Salesforce's Data Fetcher can help make this a really easy process. I'm going to jump out of my presentation and jump over into Salesforce. And looking here, we've got a quick view of the app. As I mentioned, they track applications of people who are interested in adopting dogs, and then they also have records of the dogs themselves that are ready to be adopted. In this screen flow that would live on the application record page, it's going to walk us through how to select the right or best email template to send when someone's been matched with a dog. Now, there is probably a time, maybe earlier in your Salesforce career, that you would have just hard coded an email template for this process. And I'm not going to fault anyone for that. I did it early in my career too. I didn't know any better. But if you don't know better, you do now that hard coding any kind of ID can be very dangerous. And the biggest challenge here is that IDs are not always consistent across environments. So if you're generating or you're working in one of your sandboxes, a partial sandbox or a developer or developer pro sandbox, the IDs of anything that you create in that environment are not going to be consistent with IDs for things in your production environment. The only time IDs are consistent is from production to a full sandbox. So, of course, we all know that best practice is to build things in a sandbox and promote to production. And so we do not want to hard code IDs into any of the work that we do because it'll test great in the sandbox, and then you push it to production, and now it fails during user acceptance testing. So this path of the flow, we would never go down that path of just hard coding what ID we want to send to get that email template. Now, the next best step before things like Data Fetcher would have been to just do a get element. And in this case, we're using the standard get element from Flow, and we're going to get the ID of the record for the email template where the name matches a specific value. So if we know we're always going to be sending this generic "you're a match" email template, we could easily use the get element. It returns the ID. And then the email action, instead of having a hard-coded ID, is going to use the ID from the record that we just got in the previous step. So that works fine. But if we want to save ourselves a get element, we can use data fetcher. So before I hop down this single email template path, I want to show you what data fetcher looks like in a screen flow. This first screen is the page that would just display on the record page for the application. In this case, I'm using a Salesforce Quick Choice action that's just going to let us choose which path we want to go down when I get to debugging this. But the element below that is data fetcher. Data fetcher is a headless component, so you can put it anywhere on the screen when you're in the canvas, but it's not going to show to your users. Nothing visually shows in the user version of the screen flow. So of course you name your data fetcher component, you pick which object you're referencing. In this case, we're getting email templates. And then we're using the SOQL query to determine which templates are available for selection. In this field, you could just type your query in directly. You could do select ID, comma, name, from, email template, where, blah, blah, blah. But this is kind of a small box to type all that out in, and there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to misspell something or miss a comma, and troubleshooting that is a little bit frustrating. So we're using a formula to be able to write out our SOQL query. We hop over into our toolbox here and we look at that formula piece. Quick note, you will see that I have descriptions filled out in all of my description fields because that is a general best practice. It saves me sanity whenever I come back to fix or edit things later. It saves future me the trouble of looking for what I was trying to do or any other future administrators that are working in this. But also now in this AI-enabled world, the description field is often what AI features are using to understand how things are happening and what's happening in your system. So if you are a person who has gotten into the habit of skipping descriptions, I encourage you to rethink that and start using the description field. In this particular formula, we're using a text element because we're going to be returning a string for the SOQL query. And then we're typing out the actual query here. It is included in parentheses so that it counts as a text return. And we're bringing back the name, the ID, the folder ID and folder name, the description, and the subject from the email template object. And then we're filtering this to only return the records where the name includes the word match. And then in our case, we're also ordering it by name in ascending order. And this is especially helpful if you have good naming convention around how you name your email templates. So this is the query that is going to get passed into the data fetcher component, which will then return available records that meet this criteria. Now, if we only had that one email, or if we always want to send that one email, then we could still use data fetcher to return the possible emails to choose from, but then we would be using the get single email template action. And when we scroll down to which one we're using the results from the data fetcher element, but we're only using the first retrieved record. And again, we have them sorted in ascending order by name. So it's just going to use whichever the first record is that's returned, which again can be important if you've got good naming convention. But to show you the really fun stuff, we're going to see what happens when we want to pick from all of the possible templates that are returned. And instead of showing the screen here, let's actually just take a look at what this looks like. So going into debug, I do have to pick the launching application record so that it knows what it should display based on what it would be looking like from the user experience. And this is the quick choice that I mentioned. And we're going to go down the path of the data fetcher where you have multiple choices. And you'll see here, this is the screen where in the canvas, data fetcher lives right underneath this quick choice action, but you don't see anything on the screen to show that. We click next. Data fetcher has run behind the scenes. It has executed that SOQL query. It has returned all of the email templates that include the word match. It has ordered them in ascending order based on the name. And now as a user, I can choose the generic email template if there's nothing particular about this adoption other than just letting the candidate know they've been selected. But if the dog that they've been matched with maybe has some transportation concerns, or they've been matched but there's a slight medical delay, the end user can select the appropriate template to send to the candidate from the list of available matching templates without having to go to the email component, click new, populate the to field, populate the from field, go down and click on insert template, find the template, insert it, etc. All right here in a simple screen flow. Okay, so that's our first use case. I'm going to hop back over into our presentation. And just for reference, I've got screenshots of everything that I just showed you all. So I'm going to click through those fairly quickly. And we're going to get to use case number 2. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, Let's Go Home also wants to allow people to be able to search for dogs from their website before they start the process of filling out an application. So they want to make sure that there's maybe a dog that they're interested in. They're more likely to fill the application out more completely if they know that there's a dog that they would like to bring home. They also want people who are searching for dogs to be able to search based on a variety of different options and then only see the dogs that meet those selected factors. So let's jump in and see what that flow will look like. I'm going to close out my debug from the previous one. And we are now looking at the all dogs screen flow. And I'm just going to pause for a moment because when we talked about the earlier way of having to do multiple steps before reactivity was available in Flow, this whole process could have been a series of 5, 6, a dozen or more different screens allowing inputs at different times. But this is the entirety of the search flow. On our first and only screen that shows to the users, we have our data fetcher component that is using a SOQL query that's just called fetch all dogs. I'll show the details of that in a moment. We also have a flow button bar, which is part of the unofficial Salesforce actions, that's going to allow users to reset the filters that they've started to put decisions into. So once they start choosing criteria by which to filter the list of available dogs, if they want to backtrack from that, they'll be able to press the reset filters button, which will clear out the filters and allow them to start their search over. Further down the screen, we've got several more quick choice actions, and each of these is an option for the candidate to be able to sort and filter the returned records. And then all of the dogs that meet the criteria are going to be displayed in this reactive data table. And again, this data table is just returning all of the retrieved results from the data fetcher element further up on the screen. Let's hop in and take a look at that SOQL query. So the one for the email was pretty simple. The only where element we had was where the name contains match. This SOQL query gets a little bit more in depth. So in this case, you'll notice again, I have the description filled out because we always fill out descriptions. In this formula, we start again with the general SOQL statement of selecting, in this case, several of the fields from, this is from what object. We're selecting fields from the dog record, and then we're limiting or we're setting up the filters with the where statement. And some of these are hard-coded in, so where the number of days available, and then this piece is returning the number of days, and it's using a slider element where they'll be able to pick how long a dog has been available for adoption. In some cases, there are amazing, loving, caring families who aren't so picky about what type of dog or how old the dog is. They really just want to rescue those dogs that have been in the shelter for a long time. So you'd be able to pick that from there. And then the dog status is already filtered to ready for adopt. And then these if statements are going to look at some of the other filter criteria. And if that filter criteria on the screen is blank, then the SOQL query is not going to return anything. It's just going to be a blank element. But if this field, the age value, is populated, then it's going to add this piece of text into the SOQL query. So it will filter by where the days available is greater than the slider value, and the dog status is ready to adopt, and the age of the dog equals the age of the value that's been selected on the filter. So that same if process repeats over and over again. And let's go ahead and take a look at what they would see on the screen. So we're going into the debug mode again. In this case, there are no input variables that need to be passed in because this screen would just be showing on Let's Go Home's Experience Cloud site for people to search without having to put in an application beforehand. All right, so now we've got our screen element where we want to see all the dogs. Now, the first thing, it's already filtering by the dogs have to be ready for adopt. So if a dog has just been rescued, but it still needs to go through its medical screening or behavioral screening, or there's just some other issue where they're not quite ready to find a new home, those dogs would never even show up on this list for someone to try to select to adopt. So all of these amazing dogs are ready to go home. And as someone who's looking for a dog to adopt, I can start to fill in some of these criteria. Now, if I have a cat at home, I would want to make sure that I'm adopting a new dog that gets along well with cats. So we're going to say, yes, I have a cat at home. And now the list has automatically updated and filtered down to only 8 dogs that have been determined to be good with other cats. You could do the same thing with good with other dogs. Maybe I have both a dog and a cat at home already. And now it's filtered down even further, removing any dogs that have been determined to be not so great for living with other dogs. I can continue to filter by different criteria of what kind of dog I'm interested in. And if I'm looking for a puppy, I want a very small dog that I can play with from the very beginning, and I look for under 1 year of age. I've now reached a point where there are no dogs that meet my criteria. Now I could go back and change the value and start seeing what dogs pop back in. But I can also just click Reset Filter. It clears out all of the values I'd previously selected and returns the full list of 12 available dogs. Now, the rest of the process of this flow would allow someone to select a dog that they want to adopt, and then you would add a Next button to take them to the screen where they can fill out the application. But that's a whole other part of the business process. Let's hop back over to the presentation. And again, I have screenshots of all the things that I've just shown you. Okay, so this is actually my favorite use case. As someone who has rescued several dogs before, I know that one of the top reasons that dogs get surrendered are because the dog doesn't get along with either existing pets or with children. So when a new dog comes in to Let's Go Home and they've been screened and they're healthy and they're ready to find their forever home, I want to try to match them up with the best possible application, but I don't want to let them get adopted into situations where I know they're set up to struggle. So if this dog is not going to get along well with children, I don't want people who have children to even have the option of being matched with this dog. It's just not going to be a good situation for anyone. So let's jump in to the app that has the flow allowing us to find matching applications for a dog. We're going to close out the previous one. And again, you'll notice this is a fairly simple screen flow. There's really only 3 elements on the screen flow canvas, and we'll go ahead and take a look. This is going to look very similar to the finding all dogs. The difference is it's going to be comparing dogs to applications. So looking at the combination or the overlap between 2 different objects. We have the data fetcher component. That's starting with the application record. And then we've got our SOQL query. I'll open that in just a moment. We also have some instructional text to help the employee who's trying to find a match. It's going to show what the dog is, what kind of criteria they have, and what we're looking to match. And then in this particular one, I've also included just what that SOQL formula is so that as we make changes, you're going to be able to see it dynamically update. And just as a note, as an administrator or someone building this flow, I would actually encourage adding just this piece to its own display text and then have a conditional visibility where it only shows to maybe users with an admin profile, or if an element is checked to say that we're troubleshooting. That way it's just always available for you when you're working through and troubleshooting with the process. Now, very similar to before, we have our flow button bar reset option, and we have our quick choices to be able to narrow down the values. And then we have our data table that's returning the retrieved results from the data fetcher. The data fetcher is retrieving those results based on that dynamic SOQL formula query. When we take a look at that SOQL query, this time though, it's pretty exciting stuff. So in here, we're getting the SOQL get applications. And let me go ahead and expand this for you. All right. So again, we've got the initial statement about what fields from the application record, and then the where criteria is filtering. So we only want to see from applications that are approved. And then just to keep this formula a little bit cleaner, I did some of the evaluation criteria in sub-formulas. So there's a separate sub-formula that checks, are they good with children? Are they good with cats? Are they good with other dogs? But here, we're going to do some additional matching. So is the dog able to be transported? If the dog cannot be transported, then we're only going to see applications where the dog state matches the application's state. So some additional queries here. I didn't show it in this example, but you can also do nested queries. So if there was an indicator or some other tag or attribute on the dog record or on the application record, you could go a layer down with SOQL nested queries. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what the dog matching looks like. Now, on the previous one, we matched based off of application. This one, we're going to match based off of dogs. So I'm just going to pick one of the dogs from the available list. And we'll see that top line populates with information from the dog record. So Sunny is a 4 to 6-year-old female lab who is located in North Carolina. And then again, this is the formula that the data fetcher is using, the SOQL query that it's using to return these application records. So right now, these 4 applications meet all of the minimum criteria for being able to get matched with Sunny. But we know that Sunny is a female, and so let's narrow this down to just applications where the people said that they were looking for a female dog. And we see it's now dropped down to 2. She is also a lab, so we can sort by breed, and we'll pick Labrador, still those 2 records. And she's in North Carolina. Let's see if we can get a match for North Carolina, and there we go. So in this case, this particular application so far is lining up to be the best possible match for Sunny. And as an employee at Let's Go Home, I could now click into this application record, reach out to the candidate, and let them know that we might have a possible match for them. But let's see a different scenario. So if we run this again, but we pick a different dog, let's pick just the next one in the list. So now it starts off with only 3. But this particular dog cannot be transported. So we're only going to see applications from the same state where the dog is currently located. And so this is going to, again, help narrow down and improve the success of this dog getting adopted and of them staying in their forever home. This dog's a little bit older, so we want to make sure that we're looking for someone who's ready to handle an older dog. All of the applications do currently match that, and we can continue the same process. But you'll notice in this one, even though it's the same screen, that state option no longer shows in the filters because this dog cannot be transported. All right, one quick note before we hop back into the presentation. If you're not familiar with SOQL queries or you haven't had a chance to work with them yet, please don't be intimidated. There's amazing resources available in the help community and also the Salesforce developers community that can help you learn how to write these SOQL queries. And then you can also, in either a sandbox or a developer environment, open up the dev console, and there's a query editor function in there that can help you practice and learn how to write queries successfully. And that's another way that having the formula show on the screen can be very helpful, because this formula of the SOQL query can be copied and pasted directly into your dev console, and then you can play around with the order or the filters, the criteria, the fields, all of those things. And it gives you that opportunity to see exactly what would be returned, Whereas the formula value that shows here has all those if statements, and then has some of the other factors, the quotation marks for how to include the values from the choices or from other formulas. So just a quick side note, having that formula troubleshooting component can be helpful for many reasons. All right, as mentioned before, there are screenshots in this presentation that will be available afterwards for you. So that wraps up my presentation on how you can use the Data Fetcher Salesforce Labs app to elevate your flows using reactive components and SOQL queries and formulas to return really dynamic experiences for your users. This use case was focused mainly on setting up a filterable dynamic list to allow users to narrow down the returned records and find the right match for their particular action. I've got some resources that are available here. The Data Fetcher app on the App Exchange itself. Data Fetcher also has its own Trailblazer community group. So if you're interested in exploring this app and have some great use cases, or even if you want to make suggestions for ways to improve it, join the Data Fetcher Trailblazer community group. There's some great resources on Trailhead with the Automate This program that Jen Lee puts on through the Salesforce admin and evangelists. There's some other great blog posts and videos on the Unofficial Salesforce websites or unofficialsf.com. And then I would be happy to connect with you and hear about how you are looking for using Data Fetcher to elevate your screen flows going forward. My information is there. I'd be happy to connect with you. And again, I would like to thank you so much for being a part of YeurDreamin 2025. Thank our sponsors in the Trailblazer community again, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of this experience. Thank you and have a wonderful day.